Kyle here from All Media Reviews, here to do another, I'm just basically doing this, progressive art rock, modern progressive art rock. Gonna do the year 2001, but I wanted to backtrack slightly on a couple that I missed that I've been putting in the description if I missed, like, I ended up finding I missed, but one of them was from the 90s list I should have included. October 28th, we had Refuse the Shape of Punk to Come, which is like prog punk or punk prog or art punk. Um, Certainly the bands that were doing prog but also influenced by punk, including the Mars Volta, were fans of this album. They had like one or two others, and they did a reunion album, but it's kind of a play on there's an album I think from like the '60s, early '60s. I don't think it was Brubeck, but was called The Shape of Jazz to Come. It was before the Electric. Might have been before the Electric Jazz with Miles. But anyway, Refuse. I've always liked this record. They have that one song, "We're Taking the Airwaves Back" or whatever. There's jazzy elements in this. It doesn't sound like pop punk. It doesn't. It doesn't. You could say it probably was important in the history of post hardcore also, but some of the mathcore bands were definitely influenced by Refuse and this album, The Shape of Punk to Come. It came out October 28th, 1998. Part of the 90s list. And then in 2000, you know, I initially made these lists, this calendar. And I did not include stuff like from Kevin Gilbert, Jeff Buckley, Marillion, especially past 2000 and King's X. But now I'm doing it, so I'm kind of have to include this album too. Please Come Home, Mr. Bulbous, which came out in 2000. It came out the same day of. I wrote it down here. Porcupine Tree. The day after Porcupine Tree's light bulb song, it came out. Please Come Home, Mr. Bulbous. May 23rd, 2000. So it adds to a little bit of depth, I suppose you could say, from the year 2000. So in the year 2000, Conan O'Brien and Shatner. All right, so moving on to the year 2001, which the truth is, yeah, new 2001. It started, the peak took a few years. I mean, it was just little albums came here in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. It wasn't as prolific. A lot of the bands were starting that would do later things. So the first one is, actually, the first one is Phenomena. Their they put out a demo called Happiness is Bingo that I don't really consider as part of canon, but I like the first Tea Party record. But their what I would consider their debut EP in effect was the Rose EP, which has the song Rose, which is on their debut album that came out in 2003. I Am the Fun Boy Monster. But Rose has some great tracks, including the title track. So that came out February 1st, 2001. So then a month later, a little over a month later, on March 6th, 2001, you had Broken Social Scene put out their debut album, Feel Good Lost. Like New Pornographers, they were Canadian sort of hybrid, or I don't know if it was a super group exactly, but collaborative project with um, Kevin Drew and what's his name? Canning, Brendan Canning. Those are the main guys. But they had other people that went on to other things. And this album maybe not so much as the ones that followed it, but so people like Feist and Emily Haynes and stuff like that. But anyway, Feel Good Lost. I talked about this a little bit in the Bees A to Z, CD A to Z. But yeah, it came out March 2001. An album that I probably need to revisit, but I mean, it's always sort of been second, third fiddle to the records that came after it. Um, so then a few weeks later, talking about Britpop, the influence of Oasis and Blur. You had Doves, you had Manson, you had a couple other bands too that would come later on, like Velveteen, that had a kind of a Britpop sound. Although in the case of them, they were Canadian, but this band is British, I believe. The band South and their debut album From Here On In, which yeah, this is out of print. I got this at Amoeba. I don't know what year. It wasn't 2023, but um, South is a band that belongs in the history of this style. Like I said, they're definitely. I should probably move this down a little bit. Um, but this album, they have one album I find to be superior to all their other records. When I checked and discovered that record, I was checking out some of the other records. Archive is another one who sort of fit a little bit in that style, but also differentiated. We came up around the same time, and they were British, but unfortunately, it was kind of watered down. It sounded like Radiohead and and like Oasis to an extent from here on. But you know, I said they have one record that came out after this that's more important. But it's from the history of their catalog. And the fact that 2001 is more of a thinner, top heavy year. I'm putting it on the list as part of the history on March 26, 2001. So then you see Marillion again with probably even more so in some ways compared to the previous two records. It was more song oriented. Their album Anarachnophobia was crowdfunded. Um, it has a plenty of just really good songs that go places. Some of them are like a mouthful, like the final track, "If My Heart Were Bald," "Roll Uphill," and "The Fruit of the Wild Rose." This is the 21st Century. Is very dreamy. I believe it's "The Fruit of the Wild Rose" that has a part of that track reminds me of Jeff Buckley's "Born in Light" or whatever it's called, off of the off of Sketches. Fallen Light, I think it is. There's a part of it where Hogarth has admitted he talked about how the death of Jeff Buckley really affected him and how it was a tragedy. Quartz is funky. That bass groove sticks out among other things. It's got that great kind of build. So Anarachnophobia is a fantastic record. I mean, it's not my favorite Marillion record, of course, but they're my favorite band, so I have a bias. But yeah, it doesn't sound like Pink Floyd even as much. It doesn't sound like Genesis. A lot of textures. Doesn't sound like Transatlantic, of course. Pete Troughs was doing Transatlantic at the same time. So, but that came out on May 7th, 2001. Just to try to keep my calendar all set up here. Okay, so then it was just a little over a week later. One of the most significant albums in my taste, and I'm the one who really champions this sort of hybrid of styles, but the R's debut album, the long-awaited, because he put out a demo called the Sour Demo in the 90s, and there was a bidding war between major labels, Jimmy Necco. Distorted Lullabies. This is one of the records I've listened to more than CDs. I've listened to more than any. I got into this band in 2005, and Mike Portnoy talked about the singer sounding like Bono on steroids, and James Labrie talked about them a little bit. And it just was hit me like a ton of bricks. And there's there's so much passion and emotion, so much the vocal range in this. I mean, sort of the atmosphere is fantastic, and the songs just stay with you. And it's melancholy and sort of dreary and sad lyrically in a lot of ways, but some of it because he knew Jeff Buckley. I didn't know him that well. It sounds more, like U2 on steroids than, and you compare it to, say, Muse, which he didn't even really know Muse at the time. He worked on this album for many years because ours started doing music in the early 90s, Jimmy Necco. But songs like I'm a Monster, sometimes is just, it's a bang. It's one of the best songs ever of all time. So dreamy. Here the Light, Medication, Dancing Alone, Fallen Souls and Drowning. Some of the falsettos are off the chart on that. And Meet Me in the Tower is a super favorite of mine. The whole record is just unbelievable. Someday, hopefully, we get it on vinyl, but it's owned by the rights. But I don't know who it is, but it was under DreamWorks, and then it was Interscope. I can't remember, but yeah, ours is Distorted Lullabies. An all-time favorite of mine. Came out on May 15th, 2001, and certainly was influenced and has influenced several, especially singers, but stylistically others. All right, so then you had the same day, actually, Tool's sort of maybe most progressive in some way album, even though, again, I'm not a fan. I have listened to it. I used to get headaches. Got it from the library. Their album Lateralis came out in May 15th, 2001. I know it's sort of like a concept album about the Fibonacci code, I think. I can't remember. But, I mean, it's Tool. Its influence can't be denied. It's a favorite of many Tool fans, although some people like a few of the records a little more, but I know maybe the most universally appreciated Tool album in some ways. Anyway, Lateralis came out on May 15th, the same day that Distorted Lullabies, May 15th, 2001. So then, fast forward to June, and we see the sophomore album from Canada's Big Wreck, follow-up from In Loving Memory of. The Pleasure and the Greed, I think the final album they did before that long hiatus. I got a promo here. The song Inhale was the hit, but I mean, at that point I saw them open for Dream Theater. I didn't check this out until later because it's like, oh, that band opened for Dream Theater, and then was getting into the Tea Party, it's like there were one bands kind of similar to the Tea Party, using a grunge influence, sort of Soundgarden influence to some degree, but also Zeppelin. Um, yeah, The Pleasure and the Greed is definitely a record. You know, again, they were, alternative. They were grungy, but they also were very kind of, atmospheric, and they weren't kind of. They were a little more interesting than your typical grunt. They weren't Bush. They weren't Bush, and they weren't some of those grunge bands. They weren't even Korn. I don't, Korn, Bush, all those bands. I could never. I wouldn't give the time of day to. But Big Wreck, I can. Ian Thornley's a pretty decent singer, even though he has some of the grunge style. I hate Kurt Cobain, but something I don't love Chris Cornell, but I'd respect and appreciate he was technically a pretty good singer. He knew Jeff Buckley, and he knew Kevin Gilbert. At least he knew of Kevin. R.I.P. Chris Cornell as well. So anyway, that was on June 5th, 2001. Bigger X, The Pleasure and the Greed. So then you had Porcupine Tree release sort of an archival release of like B-sides. I know it has a song Buying New Soul, which a lot of people appreciate, but their album recordings, which a lot of people love this release. I remember liking it, but not enough to even buy at the time. I probably should get it at some point, but recordings came out on June 12th, 2001. And this is right in that period when, Chris Maitland wasn't going to stay in the band, and they had major label, interest, and they ended up signing eventually to Lava Atlantic. But that was June 12th, 2001. Then June 18th, just 6 days later, we see the sophomore album from Muse, which is only in England. It didn't come out in the US until like 2005 or 2006, right when I got into Muse. Origin of Symmetry, which I didn't know at the time, but features my favorite track on this record, the cover of Feeling Good. But yeah, I mean, there's some crazy sort of textured sections in here. Hyper Music, Plug-in Baby is definitely one that I appreciate. Citizens Raid is kind of epic. It has its moments. I'm not thrilled with the production, having revisited this a fair amount last year when I was doing that, collaboration with Brendan from Death by Unicorn talking about it. That's right. I remember meeting the guys outside the State Theater in 2006. Got him to sign it. I forgot about that. Dark Shines, Space Dementia. I will say that compared to some Muse records, it doesn't seem to wear out its welcome so much. One point I just said, this is Muse's proggiest, and it definitely separates itself from the debut album from '99, Showbiz. But I think from a production and a mixing standpoint, I can't like this album as much as a few others. But I like it more than a lot of the records in the last like 15 years. So anyway, Origin of Symmetry, originally released in the UK, maybe in Europe, whatever, in Europe, June 18th, 2001. They were still kind of unknown. A friend of mine saw them play at the Fine Line in front of like maybe 300 people. It's weird to think that now. I saw them at the State Theater in front of like maybe 1,500. That was 2006. So then after that, soon after that, I don't know the exact date. So it might come before those. It might come at the end of June in 2001. We had the debut release from the Decemberists. I believe they're from Seattle, either Seattle or Portland. Of course, the CD comes out. I think they're from Portland, actually. Yeah, they're from Portland. Portland, Colin, what's his last name? I can't remember. Colin, from and he was led by, they compared them a little bit to New Milk Hotel, and it's this EP called 5 Songs, which he's a more stomachable or digestible singer. This is really a collab. This is almost like Phenomena. I mean, Phenomena and them were contemporaries. It's just interesting to think that the songs were all written in a sort of like, okay, we're gonna put all the lyrics and cram it in here on the booklet. My mother was a Chinese trapeze. I mean, he was already doing sort of fable or literate sort of fictional literate story lyrics. And I remember this EP being more. Their early Decemberists is more overtly folk. I mean, they were still adventurous from a standpoint of the lyrics, and but they really went more progressive later and more artsy. But it's still notable that their debut would be partly because 2001 wasn't as deep of a year for full lengths. June of 2001, the 5-song EP. I'll remember his last name. I can't. I want to say Colin Hay or Colin Moulding, but that's not XTC or Colin Hay with, was it like a band from Australia? Anyway, uh, okay, so then we have, I believe it's an EP. It's one of the three or four EP slash singles, Ocean Size released before their first full length on August. So it was a couple months later, August 12th, 2001. A Very Still Movement, which I believe this title track is like, it's an epic. So, but yeah, Ocean Size kind of had a slow build, a little like ours. Ours took whatever it was, 10, 11 years before they put out a full length. Then they became a little more prolific. Ocean Size were a band probably, and Dredge was the same way actually for several years before they put out their full length. But they put out a release called "A Very Still Movement" on August 12th, 2001. So then, yeah, I don't have a physical copy of the first part, but we see the second or third album, I believe, from the Appleseed cast, Low Level Owl Volume One. Don't have a physical copy, but the Low Level Owls were kind of a continuation of Mare Vitalis, where they were kind of raw, kind of emo, but they were still doing those kind of post rock textures, but they didn't really hit their full stride till later. But yeah, Volume One, they did two of them. I'll be talking about the other one in a few minutes here, but that was on August 21st, 2001. So then you had in September of 2001, just a week before 9/11, actually, political band, System of a Down, sort of new metal, experimental metal, alternative metal, um, or hard rock, Zappa influenced, and Faith No More influenced band. Their sophomore album Toxicity, which the title track alone is fantastic. So is Ariel's Chop Suey. Yeah, okay. This has several songs that became sort of corporate metal staples, and they've still been used at sporting events, and it's a great record. Toxicity. I think it's properly rated. I don't think it's overrated, but I don't think it's underrated. I saw them with the Mars Volta back in 2005, but Prison Song, Needles, more political, but the mix of Serge and Darren's vocal styles adds something to this album more so than on the debut. So the Celltel debut from a couple years before that. Was it just the year before that? My mixing up, knowing my history here. It was a few years before that. So anyway, System of a Down's Toxicity on 9/4/2001, September 4th, 2001. Of course, then we had 9/11 just a week later. We had Dream Theater's live scenes from New York came out that day, and a few other records got pulled. So then on the 24th, it was just a few weeks after 9/11, we see the first album from eventually became sort of a textured psychedelic, you know, rock band, but were originally more like stoner metal kind of stuff. I believe they're from Scotland. Talked about them a little bit in the A to Z. Ariel Grom's debut album, Story in White. So just for sort of historical, significance. An album I haven't listened to in a long time, but again, I don't get around to listen to some of these albums that didn't do as much for me. But it's from a significant standpoint of Ariel Grom were a band that did other things later. This is where they got their start. Came out September 24th, 2001. A Story in White. Interesting cover, but anyway. So that, and I wasn't into them until around 2007 when their final record came out, unfortunately. But debut album came out that on September 24th, 2001. So then I mentioned King's X earlier, and I forgot them in the 2000 video. They followed up with the next one. These were both, that album was on Metal Blade, the previous one, and this one was on Metal Blade, I believe. A favorite of mine. It's only lead Doug vocals. I know it's sort of polarizing at best for some people. It's got the song Vegetable. The album Manic Moonlight was released by King's X on September 25th, the day after our Air Grom. And yeah, this is, I mean, again, does it sound like Radiohead or Tool? Not exactly. It sounds like King's X, but it sounds a little bit different for King's X in a way. It was more kind of, they're using samples and loops and stuff like that on a few songs, but the energy is just fantastic on this record. I didn't like it that much at first. I liked Vegetable, but that was like one of the only songs I like, and then it kind of grew on me like a ton of bricks. Jenna, the title track, Believe. I think it's a fantastic performance. Again, I know the band themselves don't love it. They like some of the tracks on it, but some of the fan base kind of look down on it somewhat. But I personally have gotten a lot of mileage out of this album, Manic Moonlight. And anyway, that came out on September 25th, and the same day, I believe this is the debut, but looking at the history, pretty obscure band by the name of Woven, who were popular among the Dredge fan base, and that's how I found out. But this album, this is an EP actually. It says Woven EP. That's what it is. But it's also known as EP E Prime or EP Prime or E Prime EPRIME. But how would I describe this? Again, this is not a band. Probably video. The tracks are probably it's probably on YouTube. It might be on. I think a few of their albums are on. A few of the releases are on Spotify, but very kind of textured rock. You think of like Chroma Key, you think of OSI, you think of some of the stuff Archive has done. I didn't talk about the debut album from Archive, which I probably should have. That was '99 Londinium. But I really like this band a lot. Like I thought I was gonna like become obsessed with them, and the Dredge fan base, a lot of them love them. They worship them, and I can see why. I mean, I never got to see them live, but yeah, they were very good. I mean, while they sounded like a few other bands, they used samples and stuff like that at points. It's very good mood music, very creative, almost like space rock. So anyway, Woven's E Prime. It wasn't their. They had a few other releases that were kind of hit and miss, but it's one of their best releases. Some people consider it their best, actually. Some of the Dredge fan. I'm specifically talking about the discussion about them on the Dredge fan because they were very much of a cult fan base, small cult fan base. But so then you had another EP, which I didn't talk about their debut album, I don't think, but the EP, the self-titled EP from the Apex Theory came out. I talked about this in the CD A to Z, of course, which has the song Shh, which was a single, I believe, but alternative rock, alternative metal with later more progressive leanings, but came out the same day. No, it came out October 9th. So yeah, the EP E Prime from Woven and King's X came out the same day on the 25th, and Eric Rom's Story in White on the 24th. But this was on the 9th of October of 2001, which followed up, which would be, let me talk about this. I believe that song Shh, Hope Diggy was later on Random Verses. I just did a little research after I made that video about the CDs A to Z, talking about the Apex Theory. Apex Theory, I believe they're from California, but kind of alternative rock, alternative metal, in that turn of hard rock, you could say. So then October 16th, 2001, the Tea Party put up their follow-up to Triptych, was a couple of years after that. Their album Interzone Mantras, which, speaking of like hiatus, is like the way that Godspeed You Black Emperor did and Big Wreck did. And even you could say I'm Mother Earth is sort of on, they're not on hiatus, but they haven't put on. This was the last, or the second to last, I can't remember. Soon after this, they went on a break for many years. Jeff Martin from the Tea Party, their trio, of course, from Canada, he ended up putting out a solo record. But Interzone Mantras is an album that, like Triptych, I wish I've liked, but I haven't listened to it nearly as much. It's an interesting. I think this was on an independent label after they were on. They had more label support with the previous, with Transmission and with The Edge of the Twilight. But yeah, it's an interesting cover. But yeah, I rated this at 4 stars. So Interzone Mantras. I mean, I from memory, they really never fully went back until really the reunion album, The Ocean at the End, to the Zeppelin-esque style, almost overtly. This one was more Middle Eastern, but anyway, it's the first record they released post 2000 or whatever. But Interzone Mantras from the Tea Party was released on October 16th, 2001. So then you had the second Appleseed Cast in a few months album, which chances are Low Level Owl Volume 2. We talked about the Appleseed Cast and showed this in that video. They had, but my guess is between Volume 1 and Volume 2, they just they had a lot. It's a typical case with like they had a lot of music and they were just going to release some of them on one record to split them up. They could have just done a box, and I think they did like a live and a remix. Live version of the whole thing. They played the whole thing live, but I mean, among their hardcore fan base, the low-level albums are. It's almost like Halloween's Keeper the Seven Key. They're important, not necessarily as much for my taste. Again, there's still enough emo in here that I'm not as into this as they do have some post-rock moments though still in it. And they of course cram in all the track titles: Shaking Hands, View of a Burning City. I don't know. Post-rock is a weird genre because there's the traditional sound and there's bands that combine a lot of instruments and samples and stuff. And that's why the Appleseed Cast aren't full on post rock. I remember when I first checked them out, they compared them to Radiohead, so that was sort of drew me in. Like, even though I don't like Radiohead, I don't like a lot of bands that are influenced by Radiohead. So then that was on October 23rd. So yeah, they released the first part of the Low albums on August 21st. It was like 2 months later, October 23rd. Low album volume 2 came out. So then I don't have an actual physical copy of this specific record, but I have an image for it in the little collage, of course. You, the, according to what I found, it was December. It was December 31st. It might have been earlier. It might have been 2002, which it really came out. But Anathello, great sort of chamber rock, chamber folk band, baroque folk, baroque pop, progressive band from Michigan. Released Luminescence in the Atlas position. And I know, like, and I don't have the first Sufjan record, I don't think, in here. I should have probably I can't remember which one it was. Because Sufjan will be showing up, the whole comparison to Sufjan. They were similar, different, but this particular album, this is the anthology, which includes it. It includes the Holiday at Sea, too. Um, some of the vocals, not vocals, but the riffs sound a little bit more like Tool. It's probably the heaviest Anathello record, actually. There isn't as much trombone and horns as they would use later, and as much percussion. There's still some, but the songwriting is really good. What was the song? Title track, But Without Love. But Without Love is fantastic. The dynamics on that track, that's prog, definitely. Anathello's Luminescence in the Atlas position came out. What I have is December 31st on New Year's Eve in 2001. And then the final one, I don't have a physical copy either. The very avant garde experimental band who, in many cases, I don't like this kind of music. It doesn't work for me, but their music, for whatever reason, has worked. It's the band Time of Orchids. I think they're from upstate New York. I could be wrong. Their debut album, Melon Whisper, came out sometime in 2001. There's no release date that I can find, so it might have been earlier in the year. It might have been the summer. But another case of a band who put out a debut album where it's actually decent. The production is kind of lacking though, but although most all the Time of Orchids records have sort of lower five production, but I don't even think I rate it as the lowest Time of Orchids records. But I like all the records, and this is their debut. For debut album, it's pretty good, although they would do better things, of course, which is kind of a lot of other than ours and yeah, probably ours is the one clear cut example, or maybe System of a Down, and to a smaller extent, King's X. Almost all these bands that were on this list did better things either later or previously. Marillion, of course. Well, I love Anorachophobia, but there are better records they put out even. So that's it for progressive art rock, modern progressive art rock. The history from 2001. I'll go on to 2002, maybe later today if I have time. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.